Welcome, viewers and listeners, to the Thinking Fans Premier League podcast. Each week, we get together with our besties who are current pro players, real coaches, academics, and stat heads. Today, we're joined by soccer analyst Harshal Patel and professional footballer Dre Fortune. I'm host Chris Mumford. Bella ciao. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, a fabulous gift for those mad about football, Moneyball for soccer, opposition analysis plus eye candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. We've got some special news. The podcast is getting its own channel, Thinking Fan Football Club, in both video and audio form. The same staff will continue to spin our yarns and interweaved analytics. Please subscribe to Thinking Fan Football Club as we fully transition over in the beginning of February. We'll be doing a unique show this week in that the FA Cup was going on. We're going to talk about some overall trends among some other things. First of all, we've got parity in the Premier League. Only 7 points separate first and 10th place. We're going to talk through the contenders and pretenders, along with some of the surprises and disappointments. We'll also talk through the weekend previews, including Leicester-Southampton, as well as Liverpool-ManUnited. So we'll go ahead and start at the top of the table, which is Liverpool. And Dre and Harshal, what I'm going to ask y'all is, what are some storylines that maybe aren't getting the attention on each of these teams? And let's not touch on the stuff that's been pretty well reported already. Harshal, what are some unique things that you see with Liverpool?
Just that, obviously, one of the biggest sort of issues that Liverpool have had this season is injuries to their defense, where almost all of their first choice defenders, I think bar Andrew Robertson, have been injured at some point or the other. So it's been they've really had to make do with what they have. They've had to play midfielders out of position. You know, we saw Jordan Henderson play at centre back in the last game against Southampton, for example. So that sort of has been a struggle for them. But I mean, it's not been a struggle where you would think it has been. I mean, it's not been a struggle defensively. They've only conceded 8 goals in the 12 games they've played since Virgil van Dijk got injured in the Merseyside derby. So it's not as if they're struggling defensively, that they're letting in goals and all of that. It's the fact is that the defensive issues, or rather the injuries to their defenders, are actually causing problems further forward and further up the pitch. And this is something we touched on last week as well, because it's as simple as something like a Jordan Henderson, when he plays at centre back, he'll probably need to take an extra touch or maybe a second or a couple of seconds more to play a pass out to say Alexander-Arnold on the right flank or Robertson on the left or one of the attackers, because he's not sure of their positioning, because he's not played at centre back. So, but at top level football, at the level of the Premier League, that extra second is the difference between, say, Robertson receiving the ball in space and, you know, being able to drive forward with it, and the opposition having one player or maybe even 2 players back. So he then can't go forward and has to pass the ball back. So that slows down the speed of the attack. So it's very fine margins. And I'm not saying that this is not something that they can't improve, but this is definitely, if you look at Liverpool, they've not looked as tidy or as efficient as they have in the last couple of seasons. And a large part of that is down to the fact that they don't have their first choice defense, who are usually the first sort of playmakers or the first guys in terms of building their attack out. And I think as long as this continues, that they don't have, their first choice defenders playing, that this will be a problem. And this is how, and this is, I mean, not how, this is why Liverpool are so close to the other teams at the top. And they haven't sort of been able to go away with it.
So, Dre, what are some observations you've had on Liverpool?
Oh, well, first, I'd like to just touch on what Harshal said there about, for example, if Henderson's playing as a center back, as a midfielder, you're so accustomed to having an influence on the game going forward in terms of, breaking lines with your passes and whatnot. And when your role is simplified and reduced like that, it's difficult sometimes to be able to fit into that role that you're being asked to play. As a center back, it's usually, 2 and 3 touches, keep the ball moving. So when you bring a midfielder who's used to, breaking lines and then creating through his passing further back, it can affect his game and obviously the team around him. But yeah, I mean, I think Liverpool's not looked as potent as we've been accustomed to seeing them. I think they've struggled a bit to create those clear-cut chances that they're usually creating going forward. And I think it shows not only, in their I think they haven't won their last 3 games or something like that. And in addition to that, their lead at the top of the table is not very secure. I mean, they've got Man U level on points with them with a game in hand. They've got City, I think, 4 points back with 2 games in hand. So I think we can possibly see them start to slip a little bit unless they pick it back up.
Right. I think my general observations are, Mane and Jota are in the top 20 in terms of successful attacking actions per 90 minutes. Salah has done well, but he hasn't, he's had some games where he's done very well. Minamino has kind of disappeared a little bit. I think his stock has gone down, and Origi just really hasn't featured much at all. In fact, I wonder if he's going to be on the roster going forward. As far as defenders go, one interesting surprise is that Milner is actually on Liverpool the most with successful defensive actions per 90 minutes. And he's in the top 20 in the league, even though he hasn't featured as much in terms of time. And I guess that's the role that Milner's playing in terms of locker room leadership. And when someone needs to go in for a hard shift, particularly defensively, Klopp can really count on him. I'm also struck by, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Robertson continuing to show well in terms of attacking stats for defenders. And I guess my final note is that the youngsters, I think the Curtis Jones has stepped up. Some of the younger folks in the back line who've been able to feature because of the injuries. I don't think it's going to be a disaster, but clearly what Harshal's point is right, is that it's not so much hurting them defensively, but just incrementally on the offensive side. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how Liverpool comes on. I personally think they're going to right the ship coming forward. I do think the runs of other teams are maybe a little overplayed still, but I guess we'll find out on Sunday when Liverpool plays Man United. So with that in mind, why don't we have a word with Man United? Dre, what are your impressions with Man United? What observations are worth sharing?
Well, they've 100% been on a decent run of form recently. Aside from their League Cup loss to Manchester City, they won 3 in a row in the Premier League, I believe, or something like that, 2 or 3. So they've been getting the results that they've needed, and they've looked stronger and stronger as a unit. Creating chances going forward, very free flowing with Bruno and Rashford and Martial and Greenwood, and I've enjoyed watching them actually. So I think going out against Liverpool, if they can get 3 points there, they're going to be in a really good position, still having a game in hand against Liverpool. And I'm surprised to say it, but the league is there to be had for them. So it'll be interesting to see how they continue.
So Dre, I'm really struck by, if you look at Man City and Liverpool, their patterns of play are pretty well established, right? While as yet Man United is a little bit less clearly defined, one would think. Do you think that, we've had this debate before, but do you think that Man United are going to have to go to more specific patterns of play, or do you think kind of the more jazz form, that's how the philosophy is and they have the players in which to do that? Where do you sit on that?
It's seeming as though it's just kind of more of a free-flowing game and just allowing them to figure it out. And I think with that, I mean, as with anything, some days it's going to work better than others. But when you have the individual quality that they have in terms of guys like Pogba and Bruno and Rashford, and then you can bring guys like Juan Mata off the bench, for example, you're always going to have opportunities to win the game, I think. So, Cavani as well. He's proven himself over the years as a potent striker in front of the goal. So I think for now they probably just continue going as they're going. It's been working, and As long as it does, I don't see any reason to change it.
I gotcha. Well, interesting that the attacking players don't feature particularly high in the Premier League in terms of successful attacking actions, but some of the defenders do. So Wan-Bissaka is rated number 2 in terms of successful defensive actions per 90, second only to Serge Aurier of Tottenham. Harshal, what's your take on this, and do you think some of their acquisitions have proved to be fruitful or not?
Oh, recruitment has definitely been much better over the last, I'd say, year or so. Ever since Ole got the job, basically, I think the players they brought in, you look at Harry Maguire, you look at Wan-Bissaka, Alex Telles came in this summer. Obviously, the sort of catalytic player was Fernandes. He's absolutely changed the mood and the form of United since he came in about a year ago. But in general, I think even though they may have paid a little more than they would have liked to, with regard to say Wan-Bissaka or Maguire last year, the recruitment that United have done has been a lot better over the last year or so than it was in the previous 2 or 3 years. And in terms of your earlier point about patterns of play, again, I've said this earlier as well, in that this season is the season, I think, for someone other than other than City or Liverpool to win the title, because it is so chaotic. So by extension, the fact that United don't have a sort of don't have established patterns of play isn't holding them back too much, because they've still been able to, especially over the last couple of months or so, United haven't lost a game in the league since the 1st of November when they lost to Arsenal. And that's nearly almost 2.5 months now. So during that time, they've still been able to put together moves through the sort of individual creativity of the attackers, Fernandes, Rashford, Martial, Greenwood when he's played, Mata when he's played, Pogba when he's played. So that hasn't really hampered them too much. And again, if they can keep that attacking I'd say, I wouldn't say efficiency, but the attacking inspiration going, and they can be a little bit tighter at the back and cut out errors, which I think is still a bit of a problem, individual mistakes at the back. As Dre said, this could be the year when United could challenge properly. I'm not saying they'll go on and win, but United have failed to even challenge for the title since Sir Alex Ferguson left. So
was Cavani, has he lived up to his billing in your opinion or not?
Oh, I think he has, because you've got to remember that he's 33 years old. Mm-hmm. Obviously came in as a free agent, but he came in right at the end of the transfer window after he'd been let go from PSG. So he hadn't really trained for the entire period of time that he was a free agent. Straight away after coming in, he had to obviously undergo a 14-day lockdown due to COVID restrictions. So that again set back his integration into the team, his sort of the time it took him to get up to match fitness and all of that. So keeping all of that in mind, I think he's done really well. He's made a definite impact in the games he's played. We've seen that, especially in the game against Southampton, for example, in the league, where he came on and scored 2 and turned the game from a loss to a win for United, even in other games. And he may not feature too highly in terms of statistics at the moment, but 2 reasons for that. I think one is obviously that he's not played that much. He's not really started games that much. Obviously, there's a ban which he's had for 3 games also recently, which has ruled him out of a few of the last couple of games. And secondly, a lot of that, the stuff that he brings to United is intangible. There's no way to measure movement, for example. But I think you can talk to any striker and they'll say that, just look at Cavani's movement, and that's the sort of, ideal to live up to, or that's what you should be showing young kids, because it's exceptional the way he's able to find space in the box, the way he's able to pull away from markers, the way he's able to engage a defender and then pull away from him, which means that the defender doesn't have time to react, but Cavani's got the space to then take a touch and score, for example. So all of those intangibles, and the fact that the likes of Rashford, Martial, Greenwood are probably learning by watching him on the training ground every day. Yeah. That is the impact that he's had. It's very similar, I think, to the impact that Zlatan had when he came to United as a couple of seasons ago. That sort of older, experienced head who's been there, done it all.
Right. Well, let's turn our attention to Leicester, who are third in the table. And I will say, Vardy is clip front and center. What kind of drives that? And I think you have to respect that a team's got a point of focus, and he's got 11 goals. I do think that Harvey Barnes should be getting more credit than he deserves. He's a top 15 in the league in terms of successful attacking actions. As far as defenders go, Ndidi, even though he's had limited minutes, is still just amazing, absolutely amazing in terms of successful defensive actions. But the real nice surprise of the season in my mind for Leicester has been Fofana, where he's just been able to, I think people knew about him, but I think he's really been able to step up to a side that frankly needed it because of the injuries to the back line. I think most people had thought that Leicester were going to have a very difficult season, and in some respects, like Liverpool, they people have been able to step in and pick up the slack really well. Dre, what are your thoughts about Leicester and what they've got going on ahead of them?
Well, I think they've established their playing style and they've implemented it quite well. And I mean, they're in third place in the Premier League, and I think even though they've consistently shown that over the last few years they're going to compete, for top 6 places and whatnot, still, when you look at the top 6, Leicester is the surprising team up there, at least for me, just based on the Premier League I've watched over the years. So and they made it through this little tough holiday period. They're still in third, and they have some tough games coming up. They've got Southampton, Chelsea, Everton, and Leeds, which will all be pretty tough tests for them, I believe. And based on how they've played, I'm sure they can come out of there with 2 or 3 wins and still be comfortably in the top 4. I think, like you said, Vardy's leading the line quite well, and he's got good support with Barnes and Maddison, Tielemans. I really enjoy watching as well. And they look a good outfit.
I really like the trade-offs they're making, and clearly Vardy is being asked to do less and less, but continue to do it incredibly well. Harshal, what are some interesting tidbits on Leicester that you see?
I mean, obviously, as I agree with everything you guys said, they've been, I think the word for them is efficient. They've won games where they've barely had maybe 2 or 3 chances, but they've put them away because obviously Vardy is in great form, and then Harvey Barnes is taking chances. He's scoring goals, and some of the other guys are also chipping in creatively as well wherever possible. Fofana has been an absolute revelation for me. He's 19. He's come into a new country, new culture, new language. Last season was probably, I think, his first season as a top level at top level when he played at Nice, but he's been able to adapt extremely well. And I've spoken about this earlier on the episodes as well, that Brendan Rodgers deserves a lot of credit for the way he's been able to reshape the backline, even though they, after all the injuries they've had, where, I mean, you think Liverpool have had a bad injury crisis. I mean, look at Leicester. I think all of their first choice defenders have been out for significant periods of time this season, and he's still been able to make it work. He's shifted his shape to move to a back 3, and it's worked. And now he's moving it back to a back 4 and sort of playing a 4-3-3, and it's working as well. But I mean, I will sound a bit of caution in terms of their attacking play. If you look at the metrics, they are only 7th in the league for XG. I mean, that's not bad. It's okay. That's an average performance, and they're overperforming their expected goals, obviously, because again, Vardy is a very good finisher. But what is worrying for me is the fact that if you look at non-penalty XG, which basically removes penalties from the equation in terms of expected goals, and for those who don't know, a penalty usually has an expected goal value of 0.75 or 0.76, depending on the data provider. But that's because historically, if you look at stats, 3 out of 4 penalties are scored. So that's the sort of value in terms of expected goals that are given to a penalty. And that's the highest, I think, value that any shot in the game gets. If you remove penalties, Leicester are 13th for XG, for non-penalty XG. And they've seen 10 penalties been awarded to them this season, which is by far the most in the league. So I'm not saying, I mean, people used to say that penalties were sort of the reason why United got many points last season, which is true because United did get the most penalties in the league last season. It's Leicester this season, and I don't know if that's a sustainable way to keep going, and whether they can continue to rely on getting penalties and scoring those sort of easier goals than an open play chance. So maybe something for Rodgers to look at is a way to maybe try and improve the side's creativity and attacking threat going forward.
Good. As far as fourth on the table is Tottenham. Dre, what are observations you've got on Hotspur?
Yeah, so I mean, throughout the season, I think there's been heavy reliance on Son and Kane up front to score goals for them. Obviously, it's worked so far, and Mourinho's definitely changed the outfit to be a lot more solid defensively and prevent them from leaking goals. I do, however, feel as though, and this is obviously my opinion, I feel as though they're starting to slip, and I think they're going to continue to slip a little bit. Just because, as we've spoken about in the previous weeks, when it comes to playing against teams where they're forced to have the ball, I think they struggle massively. So they're going to come up against Villa, Sheffield United, then they play Liverpool again. It'll be interesting. I mean, obviously they have the individual quality to win any of those games, but it just comes down to how they set up on the day and how they go out and look to play. So for me, I think Spurs continues to slip down the table a little bit, but only time will tell.
Harshal?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look at it from a statistical point of view, Spurs are easily the team that's sort of most outperforming metrics in the league this season. They're outperforming their expected goals and their expected goals against by the most of any other team in the league, which, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. One is obviously that's a great thing. The fact that you're scoring more goals than you should be, you're conceding lesser than you should be. Obviously, your players are doing something right on the pitch. But if you look at these metrics over a period of time, even, over the length of a season, they normally regress back to the mean, outperformance, either direction, whether it's overperformance or underperformance, you do tend to regress back to the mean, if not in a season, definitely over maybe a couple of seasons or a slightly longer period of time. So while this is good in terms of where they are in the table, the fact that they've been able to they did struggle a little bit over the last few weeks where they dropped points, especially because Mourinho sort of went for the safer option of, they've scored a goal, so they're going to sit back and defend now. And opposition teams have been able to score late on, and Tottenham have sort of been denied a win because of that in multiple games this season. He didn't actually do that against Leeds. They kept attacking, even though they took the lead, and they ended up scoring 3 goals in the first half. So maybe that's the way to go for Spurs. I mean, I don't think Mourinho is an all-out attack coach. We know that, but maybe he should let go of the handbrake a little bit, because at the moment, I feel that, and obviously they are so reliant on Harry Kane and Son Heung-min that an injury to one of them, both of them, suspension, absence due to COVID or something like that, if that happens, Spurs are really going to struggle, I think. So it may be worth it for Mourinho to try and get his other attackers into form by getting them into goal-scoring positions, which would only happen if they attack a little bit more.
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Dombele. He is that adds a degree of creativity. He is in the top 20 in terms of successful attacking actions per 90 minutes. Kane and Son, it's going to be interesting. They don't have the Jota to step in after, in the absence of that. I have been really amazed. I mean, Mo knows how to do defense, right? That is very obvious. But I mentioned Serge Aurier is first in the Premier League in terms of successful defensive actions, and Reguilon is in the top 11. So it just you have to appreciate how clear everybody's roles are, and that they do them very, very well. I do think they're probably 1 to 2 attacking players away from being able to really do well and in terms of contend. And I just wonder, will Levy be able to find a good deal this January? I think the answer is probably no. And I'd be fascinated to see what they do during the summer on that. So we'll go ahead and leave Tottenham there. Let's turn our attention to Man City. Harshal, how's Man City doing now? And kind of what are some surprises that you've seen?
I'm glad you said now, Chris, because had you asked me this 2 weeks ago, and you guys have heard me say this, that City are struggling, they're not creating chances, blah, blah, blah. And the game against Chelsea was probably their best performance of the season. I'd say probably one of the best performances that they've put out in the last 12 months. It came out of the blue because there was nothing in the lead up to that game in terms of previous matches or whatever to suggest that City would be able to put together that sort of fluid attacking performance. But they didn't repeat that exactly against United in the Carabao Cup semi, but they were again pretty good in that game as well. So I think, and I've mentioned this earlier, the fact that Pep's system or the way he wants to play requires width. You need width to be able to stretch the opposition defense, which creates space centrally, because obviously if the defense is stretched, there are pockets of space that open up centrally for the likes of De Bruyne to then exploit. And in the game against Chelsea, he played wingers on their natural side, which meant that Raheem Sterling played on the right, Phil Foden, left-footed player, played on the left, Zinchenko was the left back, Cancelo was the right back. So you had players playing on the natural sides, which meant that they were able to either overlap if the wingers came inside, or the wingers were staying out wide, which was usually the case, that the wingers were the guys holding the width and then the fullbacks would come inside. Cancelo, for example, I've been extremely impressed with Joao Cancelo. He had a very tough debut season last year. I honestly thought that this might not work out for him at City, but he's probably been their most consistent and their most dangerous player, especially creatively, I think, after De Bruyne this season. And he's essentially playing as a central midfielder. He comes into central midfield and plays infield as a third central midfielder, with De Bruyne then pushing forward as a sort of number 10. So those sort of tactical tweaks that Pep has been employing are now starting to come together, I think, in the way that he played against Chelsea and United. And this probably is going to be the system that they use going forward. And just one last thing, that you expect City to be leading the league in terms of goals scored, chances created. They're not doing that. They're actually the best in the league in terms of their defensive output this season. They have the lowest goals conceded, total or per game, and it's the same for expected goals against. So their defensive performance has actually been really good. They've improved on that over the last couple of seasons. Ruben Dias has been a superb acquisition. I think and we've seen the resurgence of John Stones. Who thought that John Stones would still be at City? And he's pushed Laporte out of the team. It's Stones and Dias who are the first choice centre backs for Pep right now. So that's basically been the story of the season, and let's see how it goes.
So I'm really struck by the fact, so defensively, I agree with all the points you've said. I'm struck that they've had the success they've had, despite the fact that no Aguero, Jesus has been underperforming this season, and Raheem Sterling really hasn't really switched on. I know he's bringing the width, but you'd kind of expect him to be doing a little more offensively in terms of assists or goals. But the team is marching forward despite that. So that's a good story. Dre, any thoughts about Man City?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really positive. I thought their performance against Chelsea was brilliant. Obviously, as we've discussed in the past, they lost attacking options. They lost David Silva, which is huge for them. They lost Sane. And it's looking as though they're finally truly adjusting to that and being able to play without those guys, in the way that they're accustomed to playing. And I mean, their chance creation in that game was phenomenal, the way they moved the ball. And, in their schedule coming up, they don't have any top 6 teams coming up. They've got Brighton, Palace, Villa, West Brom, Sheffield United. These are all games that you probably expect them to win, and quite handily as well. So they're 4 points off the top with 2 games in hand. I expect them to be at the top of the Premier League very soon and probably hold that position as long as they keep playing the way they are.
Nice. I like that. Get some parity at the very top there. Let's turn our attention to Southampton. Harshal, what's your thought about Southampton's in sixth right now? Is that sustainable, or are we going to see some regression to means?
I mean, it is sustainable. And I've been impressed by the fact that, again, they've also been a team who've suffered a little bit with injuries, but with them, it probably hits a little deeper than it does with other teams because they don't really have a lot of depth. We saw that in the game against Liverpool. It was a bench full of, I mean, Hasenhüttl said as much after in the post-match where he said that I basically brought the entire academy with me on the bench because I don't have players. Yannick Vestergaard, who's been absolutely brilliant for them at defensively and offensively. He scored a few pretty big goals for them from set pieces. He's gotten injured, so they've had to bring in someone else to play at centre back alongside Jan Bednarek. Danny Ings has not been fit for large parts of the season. He's picked up a couple of injuries, but despite all of that, they've still been able to sort of keep their place towards the top end of the table. And we've said this before. Hasenhüttl has a very fixed style of play, a fixed system. So every player knows, like, in terms of what their role is going to be on the pitch if they're playing in a certain position. So, for example, if you've been picked to play as one of the attacking midfielders, you know what you need to do. If you've been picked as one of the central midfielders, doesn't matter if you've not played, at all for the club before, but if you're part of the first team group and you've been brought in, you know what your role is going to be. So that's also why I think some of the younger players have been able to thrive, because their roles are clear and they're being asked to do. They know what they need to do. It's not a case of them being told, hey, you know what, just go out there and have some fun. It's not that. It's there is instruction given to them in terms of when to press, when to pass, who to pass to, all of that stuff. So I think it is sustainable, but it'll be interesting to see if they can cope with the absences. I mean, they have been able to do so thus far, but let's see if they can continue to do that.
Yeah, I will tell you what I've been really struck by is, to me, is Walker Peters. I mean, I just really think that from a defensive and offensive perspective, he's really, I think, been one of the real highlights of the season in the entire Premier League. And the back line, I think as a unit, they perform so well together. And they have a bit of a Tottenham problem in that when Ings goes down, it's pretty challenging. I will say it's nice to see a bit of a renaissance with Walcott really coming back, and let's hope that Che Adams regains some of the form he had a little bit earlier in the season. Dre, any take on Southampton?
Just quickly, the Liverpool win was huge for them, coming off, I think it was 4 games without a win or something like that. So that was definitely big. But I think it's important to note that there's only 3 points separating them from 10th. So, I mean, when we speak about, sustainability and whatnot, I think it's going to come down to the individual quality. And, they've still got teams behind them, like Everton's been strong, Villa, Chelsea's there, obviously. Arsenal, who is picking up now a little bit, and they're only, I think, 6 points behind them. So, they're going to have some tough tests coming up in terms of trying to keep those spots. They've got Leicester, Leeds, and Arsenal in the next 3 games. And I think those will be huge for them in terms of, where they'll fall towards the end of the season.
Harshal, what is your take on Everton? Are they coming to form? I mean, they've won 4 out of the last 5 matches.
Everton are a little bit difficult to read in terms of being able to maybe predict where they're going to end up, or even if they can put together a run of form, because they've had that sort of season which has been a little bit up and down, where they started off really well, obviously, and then they dropped off, and then they picked up a couple of wins, and then again lost a few, and all of it's been a bit up and down for them. So, I mean, even in the FA Cup over the weekend, it took them extra time to beat a lower league opposition, even though Ancelotti had put out a pretty decent team in terms of the players who were on the pitch. So with Everton, I think it's a case of them being reliant on a few key individuals, where, especially down their left, Luca Digne at left back and Richarlison at left wing is such a potent combination. Digne has made a sort of, I think, miraculous is the only word I can say for the recovery he's made. He's back in 6 weeks from ankle surgery, and I think he might have torn a couple of ligaments as well, but he's back in 6 weeks from that injury. So it'll be good for them that they have that partnership back. James Rodriguez is back as well, although I think it might take him a week or so to be back to full fitness. But if they have all of those guys on the pitch, the likes of Rodriguez, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, Digne, Richarlison, Seamus Coleman back at right back, Allen, if once he's fit and he's sort of playing at defensive midfield again, if they have their sort of first choice 11 on the field, they're a match for anybody in the team. But I think anybody in the league, I meant. But some of the backup, some of the guys who've been asked to play a role which they're not accustomed to, with the likes of Iwobi having to play at wing back, Ben Godfrey, who's a centre back, having to play left back, for example. Those sort of things have hurt them a little bit. So I expect that if their first choice team, their first choice sort of 11, 12, 13 odd players, that sort of core group is able to play week in, week out, they should be able to challenge for, top 4, maybe top 6. But if not, I think maybe, where they are 7th in the table, maybe 7th to 10th is where they'll end up if that doesn't come to pass.
I think consistency is going to be the hallmark, obviously, for the top 4, but even the Europa positions. And I still don't buy that from Everton yet. I worry a little bit about, Calvert-Lewin scored 11 goals for them, and everybody else together is coming in at a little less than half that, around 5 or 6 goals. So I wonder a little bit about where they're going to get their offensive performance when Calvert-Lewin goes down. It just seems the way the season's progressing that the style, the physicality that he plays, he's going to have to get rested. He may get injured. So, I'm really hopeful that Everton is able, where some of the other attacking players come into better form. Dre, what's your take on Everton?
Yeah, I think they're another team where the separation between them and the teams in the higher places is the depth. I mean, obviously they've struggled with injuries, and that's going to impact any team, but having players step in that are going to keep the same level is important. So, I mean, Everton's always had question marks for me when you beat Liverpool, City, and Arsenal, and then lose to West Ham. People are going to be scratching their heads a little bit and wondering what's going on. But now that they're getting back to full strength, I think they'll have a solid challenge for top 6, maybe, in those Europa League places. Maybe not top 4, probably like 5 or 6, I think for Everton.
So Harshal, the team that I wonder about is Aston Villa in their place. They're in 8th place now. They could contend for Europa. Do they belong at 8th place now, or do you think that maybe they could be legitimate Europa contenders?
I'd probably, completely honestly, I think Aston Villa have a shot at Champions League this season, very honestly, because I've been very impressed with the way they've played. The business they did this summer was brilliant because they brought in players to fill sort of problem spots in the squad who've made the team better immediately. And even if you look at the metrics, they're doing well on a number of metrics. They're one of the best sides in terms of XG. They're letting up very few quality chances as well. So the XGA is great. They're taking a lot of shots, and they're taking those shots from good positions, from sort of closer in the box. And they're the best team from set pieces by far in the league. And one of the biggest factors for that is the fact that Jack Grealish is the most fouled player in the league. So that automatically means that they're winning a lot more free kicks than other teams are. And then they have the ability on the ball, on the set piece itself, with the likes of Grealish to take the free kick, and the likes of Tyrone Mings, Ezri Konsa, Courtney Hawes, the centre backs basically, and even Ollie Waugh, to win duels in the air and score goals from set pieces. So they're pressing really aggressively. They're one of the few teams this season whose PPDA, which is passes per defensive action, their PPDA numbers for this season are lower than that for last season. And with PPDA, basically the lower the number, the more aggressive your press, because it basically means the number of passes that you allow the opposition to make before you make a defensive action, whether that's a tackle, an interception, a block, or whatever. So given that most teams have dropped off in terms of their pressing because of the physical sort of limitations that will come into play over this year, given the short turnaround we've had between seasons, the lack of a preseason, the number of matches that teams are being forced to play in a short period of time. It's really impressive that Villa are actually pressing more aggressively than they were last season. And yeah, just looking at them, I think they're a much more cohesive unit than they were last time around. They have more attacking firepower, I'd say, because I think they were a lot more reliant on Grealish last season, whereas this season they're the likes of Bertrand Traore, Watkins up front, Ross Barkley when he's back fit again. All these guys are contributing to the attack. Anwar El Ghazi is on a mad run of form. I think he scored more goals this season than all his previous Premier League seasons combined. So all of that put together, I think Villa definitely dark horses for Champions League, in my opinion.
Well, that's very interesting. I want to second your views. I hope that Barkley bounces back in that he came out so strong, and I just thought he really added that extra dimension to Aston Villa. So I imagine he's going to be playing an important role if they do make that push into Champions League. I will say that Matty Cash has got two good things going for him. Number one, he's third in the Premier League in terms of successful defensive actions per 90 minutes. And his name is second only in terms of cool sounding Matty Cash to our own Dre Fortune here. So something to be said about cool names in football. How about you, Dre? What any thoughts on Aston Villa?
I'm going to disagree with Harshal in terms of Champions League, but not because of their performance. I don't see any team that they beat out. When you look, Liverpool, Man U, Leicester, I think City will have the last one. I don't know what order, but I think that'll be the four. But Aston Villa has been really impressive. I've really enjoyed watching their front three. When they have their first choice lineup, they've shown that they're capable of competing with any team in the league, which is always positive. So, they've gone through a little bit of a rough patch in terms of their fixtures. They just played Chelsea, Man U, and Liverpool, and now they have Spurs, Everton, and City coming up, which are going to be three tough tests for them. And I think if they can come out of that strong, especially missing some of the players that they're missing, I think they'll be set for a good run towards the end of the season.
So let's turn our attention to the number 9th team, which is Chelsea. Probably the most sustained head scratcher of the season. That's the title they've won. In terms of individual performances, believe it or not, Hudson-Odoi is ranked 3rd in the Premier League in terms of successful attacking actions, but he's only gotten 363 minutes, while Jet Pulisic comes in next with 742 minutes. So I'm just really impressed by the fact that players that have gotten some of the least minutes have done well, and it could be just because the teams that they're playing against, but I'm really struck by, and there's been a lot talked about finding that right combination, and Lampard probably still doesn't know what the right combination is. I think we can conclude that Chelsea has sorted out its its massive defensive problems this year versus last year. Mendy, the roses come off a bit off the bloom, but I still think he's a top 5 Premier League goalkeeper. And Azpilicueta is a top performer, but isn't getting as much minutes. So Harshal, help us unpack your sense of where Chelsea is.
I think we're seeing probably the limitations of Lampard as a coach or a manager, because he came into this job with just a year's experience at Derby County, and I think that's nowhere near enough preparation to manage a club like Chelsea. It's honestly a very similar situation to Man United, with United appointing Solskjaer. He had experience in the Premier League, but that was with Cardiff City, who got relegated under his watch. And he'd otherwise managed in Norway, and he did win titles, but that's the Norwegian league is obviously a much it's a much I wouldn't say easier, but the challenge is much bigger in the Premier League, especially if you're at Man United. And it's a similar thing for Chelsea, where they've gone for a club legend, but I genuinely don't think he's the man for the job long term. He's done a great job in terms of stabilizing the club after Maurizio Sarri, although, I mean, I will always argue that Sarri was wrongly terminated. I thought he should have been given more time, and he did really well. He got them the Champions League and he won the Europa League during his time at Chelsea, but he was still fired. But that's a topic for another day. Lampard, I think some of the tactical decisions he's made have been slightly baffling to me. For example, in the Chelsea game, he set out a lineup which would have been good at playing on the counter, and that's what you would expect them to have done against City. But they ended up trying to press high and dominate possession, which made no sense to me, and it didn't play to the strengths of the players he had on the pitch. Where, I mean, Timo Werner, for example, is someone who does well in transition in when he has fast breaks or fast attacks to play with. He's not going to be the guy who's going to hold up the ball for you and be able to hold off a defender or win duels in the air and stuff like that. And not that Chelsea went direct to him, but he was being asked to play a role which is completely alien to him. N'Golo Kante, I mean, I think he's been used incorrectly, because he is someone who's going to go after the ball. He's not going to sit and anchor the defense. And in the 4-3-3 that Lampard plays, he plays as the deepest midfielder, but because he goes after the ball, it leaves space in front of the defense for opposition teams to exploit. So those are just two of the things. I mean, there's a lot more that I think Lampard hasn't done correctly, or in my opinion, there are things that he needs to change. Callum Hudson-Odoi should probably be playing a lot more than he has, as you pointed out. So there's quite a few things which I think he's not really got right yet, and let's see whether he can get those things right in the future. Because to be honest, Roman Abramovich isn't known for his patience, and they backed him. The Chelsea hierarchy backed Lampard massively in the summer with the spending that they did. So, I mean, you would think that he would need to at least, I mean, I think top 4 is the bare minimum that he needs to achieve to stay in a job for next year at Chelsea. So let's see if that pans out. But at the moment, I don't think they're going to make top 4. I don't think they're going to do that.
Trey, do you have any take on who should be up top and the key midfield positions?
Well, first, Chris, I'm going to say we got to start letting Harshal go before me. He takes all my points. But no, I think with the way the team has looked recently, the struggles that they've had, I mean, this is, for me, the City game is the second game in a row. I didn't catch the Villa game, but it's the second game in a row, them and Arsenal, where I felt Chelsea just looked clueless. They didn't look like they really had any clear idea of what they wanted to do going forward. For me, I'd want Giroud up front. He's the most experienced. He's been scoring. He's been in good form. And I think he's just going to kind of help settle everything down. I think right now, when you look at the Chelsea squad, there's lots of talent in there. But I think at the moment, you just need the most experienced players to kind of just lock it down. Or maybe, you go the route that Arteta went with Arsenal for a little bit and play a bunch of the young guys. But I think he's got to kind of pick one and stick to it. But then again, I agree completely that I think it's just his inexperience. His combined with the players' inexperience, I think, is what's creating the issue. I think when you don't have a manager who's able to deal with the inexperience of the players, and by that I mean the guys like Werner, Havertz, Pulisic, they're obviously they're great players, but they're still coming along in terms of the Premier League landscape. I think without having a manager who's accustomed to that and able to really take care of them and make sure that they're fully understanding what they're up against, it'll be a little bit tough for them. So I expect Chelsea to keep climbing just based off their individual talent and whatnot. I imagine that they'll make it somewhere in the top 6 area, but it'll be tough for them against the better teams for sure. Good.
Well, let's turn our attention to West Ham. West Ham is they're in the 10th position, and their defense, I think, has really been well anchored by Masuaku, who is ranked number 1 in the Premier League in terms of successful defensive actions. And I'm sorry, in terms of attacking actions, 5.35 for defenders. While as yet, from a defensive perspective, they seem to manage well in terms of as a unit, no particular standouts defensively. And as far as their attacking has gone, they've had some injuries. And so Benrahma and Antonio, we just haven't seen as much of them as we'd like to. Will they be able to address that, Harshal, going forward? Because I see a well-constructed team. I just don't see that ability in which to finish. There are a couple games they just weren't able to get over the top or close out.
I'd say the jury's still out in terms of whether they'll be able to cope with that, as you said. But I think David Moyes has already done a good job in terms of coping with the absence of Masuaku. When Masuaku was fit up until the last, I'd say, 3 weeks or so, from the start of the season up until then, they were playing a back five with Masuaku as the left wing back and Cresswell, who is a left back, playing as the left centre half. And that system worked really well for them. But since Masuaku got injured, Moyes has been forced to go back to a back four with Cresswell playing at left back. Although I think he did play back five again a couple of weeks ago with kid from the youth academy, Ben Johnson, playing at left wing back. So, I don't know if he'll keep that sort of shape going forward and play Johnson at left wing back. But as I agree, they're a very well drilled team. They're very different to what they were last season, where they escaped relegation by a bit of a whisker, and they were not really good last season. But I think this season they've come on a lot better. They're putting together better performances on the pitch. They look more determined. They look better coached, I'd say, in terms of their defensive shape, in terms of even the counterattacks that they've been able to mount and the goals that they've been able to score. They look a much better outfit. I've been very impressed with the midfield, which is Declan Rice and Thomas Souček. Rice has come on leaps and bounds. I'll be the first one to admit that I've had major doubts about Rice ever since he's been hyped up as this next big, great young English kid. I'm not saying, and I'm still not fully convinced that he is absolutely wonderful and he's going to change sort of the way England play and be the next big English hope. But he is very good, especially this season. He's done his job really well, protecting defense and then being able to retain possession, but also when needed, being able to go up and join the attack. And Souček, who was signed in January last year, has been a revelation. He scored, I believe, 5 goals in the league this season already, and from midfield. And he's become that sort of, he's very similar to Marouane Fellaini, who was a sort of talismanic player for Moyes at Everton, and he also obviously brought Moyes to Man United. He brought Fellaini to Man United. And it's a very similar profile in terms of the size, in terms of aerial ability, and both and the sort of box-to-box ability that Souček has, obviously in his own defensive third, being able to protect his own area, but at the same time make runs into the box and score. And we saw that in the most recent Premier League game that West Ham played, where they clinched that win over Everton. It was Souček who got into the box and scored from Cresswell's cross. He had the anticipation to make that run and get on the end of the finish. None of the other West Ham players did that. So, yeah, as I said, well-drilled, well-coached team, some very good individual players. It'll be interesting to see if they go into the window in January, because I think they're looking for a striker now that they've sold Sebastian Haller to Ajax. So, because, Mikel Antonio is very injury-prone, and they do need someone who can come in and play with him and also replace him when he's injured. So, let's see if they bring someone in. But other than that, I think they've done really well. Maybe contenders for Europa, but even if that's not the case, even if they finish 10th, I think it's a huge improvement on last season.
Trey, my sense is they're probably going to finish around 13th or so, plus or minus. In terms of upcoming games, any thoughts about West Ham in general?
Yeah, I think the overall trend for them is they've been finding ways to beat teams that are below them, and they've lost to teams above them. So, coming up, they've got Burnley, a struggling West Brom, Crystal Palace, and then they finished the month out with Liverpool. So I mean, I anticipate though that's 12 possible points. I'm sure they can get, between 7 and 10 points out of those fixtures and just kind of keep moving along where they are. Seen news about them potentially selling Felipe Anderson, which will bring in a good amount of money for them in terms of potentially getting another striker to replace Halle, who they just sold. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're right where they should be, and they're probably going to stay about in that range, plus or minus maybe 2 spots.
Well, let's turn our attention to the next team, which is near and dear to Dre's heart, which is Arsenal. I guess after a pretty dark beginning, things seem to be turning up a bit. Do you buy that story? What are some little niches we should be looking at in the Arsenal story?
Yeah, I buy it 100%. I think obviously it's hard to discredit the difference that Emile Smith-Rowe has made into the team. It's what everyone's been saying in terms of creativity, linking the midfield with the attack, getting guys involved, and he's done that quite well. So it's been positive with the recent results, and obviously you don't want to get too ahead of yourself. I mean, they're still in the bottom half of the table, but with Palace coming up, Newcastle, a little bit of a tougher test with Southampton, you'd expect based on the recent run of form that they'd be able to get some results and kind of keep inching up the table a little bit. So yeah, I mean it's been fun to watch. They've been scoring some tremendous goals. It's not just the fact that they've been winning the games, but the goals they've scored are in my opinion, brilliant team goals, and they've looked really strong. So hopefully they just continue.
I don't think many people question their prospects in the next couple of years or so. It's going to be interesting to see if Lacazette continues to find his mojo, but more importantly, getting Aubameyang going and seeing if Pepe and Willian can at least start to contribute kind of league averages, right? That to me would be nice to see. From a defending perspective, I'd love to see more and more from Maitland-Niles. He does rate very highly in terms of successful defensive actions per 90. It's and really watching Kieran Tierney in terms of what he can do in terms of attacking play and initiating attacks has just been a real revelation. Harshal, do you think it's justifiable for Arsenal fans to be optimistic, and should they at least be contending for Europa in the next few weeks, kind of getting back more into those slots?
Yeah, definitely, because again, we spoke about the table being tight. They're just 6 points off the top 4. Mm-hmm. So it's a couple of games, maybe 3-4 games going their way, and they could be back in the conversation for top 4 when maybe a month ago people were, especially on social media, people were making a case for them being relegated. So, I mean, that just tells you how tight the league has been this season, as well as the fact that while, I mean, there's no doubt that it was a crisis, the fact that they went 5-6 games without a win in the Premier League, it wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. And the solutions were sort of staring Arteta in the face, as we spoke about earlier, play the kids. And Smith-Rowe has been an absolute revelation, linking midfield and attack, as Ray said, which was something they'd been lacking so much. Where, I mean, there were games I remember watching where it was a literal hole that you would see between the Arsenal midfield line and the attack, because nobody was dropping deep to pick up the ball, or nobody was in that sort of position naturally. And I spoke about this, I think, on last week's podcast, where I said that Lacazette does well because in terms of the way he's playing, where he's dropping deep, because he's got quick, rapid runners around him, which he has now, with Smith-Rowe, with Saka playing on the right, and with Martinelli playing on the left. He's got those guys who he can, and he knows that, if he drops deep, those guys will take up the space that he's vacated and potentially then be able to run through on goal. So Lacazette obviously has been in a great run of form, scored 5 goals in the last 4 games. Martinelli, he did pick up an injury in the FA Cup game, and I think it could be another semi-serious one. He could be out for a bit. So let's see what the news is on that front. But I expect Smith-Rowe to probably play the majority of minutes from now on. Aubameyang will probably come in and play on the left most games, although I honestly would have made the case for Martinelli, Smith Rowe, Saka, and Lacazette to be Arsenal's four-man attack, and Pepe and Aubameyang to be used as rotation or to freshen things up. But let's see how it goes in that respect. And as I said, I think playing the kids is a good idea at the moment, backed up by the experience that some of the guys have. Arsenal do need to get rid of quite a few players because they're taking up a lot of space in terms of wage bill. Obviously, the big sort of elephant in the room is Mesut Ozil, and rumors are that he's off to Turkey this month, which, if true, is a sad ending to his Premier League career. But I mean, I think that's the writing's been on the wall for a while with that particular case. But there are a couple of others, Socrates, maybe. There were rumors about Bellerin in the summer. I don't think anything will happen in January, but I expect to see quite a lot of outgoing movement, if not in this window, then definitely in the summer as well. Coming back to their prospects for this season, as I said, 6 points to top four, definitely I think in Europa League contention, and it just needs a few results to go their way and they could be back in the top four conversation as well.
Super. Well, we have some other teams we're going to deep dive on in the next podcast, but we wanted to wrap up this podcast by doing a few previews, including the Leicester-Southampton game. Harshal, what are some key points we need to be looking at or key matchups in that match?
This is going to be a team, not a team, I mean, this is going to be a game between two pretty, I wouldn't say evenly matched teams, but two teams who there is a potential. I think this has the potential to be a draw because it's one of those where, in a good way, the fact that both these teams, I think, are much better than the sum of their parts, especially Southampton. I mean, you wouldn't think Southampton do have some very good players, but I think it's the collective and the way they play and the tactics and the system that Hasenhüttl has imposed that has led them to be pretty good this season. And it's a similar case for Leicester, although I think obviously Leicester have man for man probably better players. So that sort of, I mean, it's what I'm basically going to be looking out to see if Leicester can maybe be a bit more attacking in terms of creativity. As I spoke about earlier, I think they are struggling a little bit with creating too many clear-cut chances. It's a case of them being efficient and taking the chances that they do create. But I mean, if you look at football in general, the rate at which they're going is a little bit unsustainable in terms of their conversion rate. So that could be a problem for them unless they start to create more sort of high-quality chances.
Give me a
regard to
score line.
Southampton, it's basically what I said earlier, where maybe a 1-1. Yeah, I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw.
Dre, what's your thoughts?
I think it'll be an exciting game, but I think it'll be 0-0. I think they'll neutralize each other.
I'm inclined to go with a 1-1 or 2-2 are the two possible outcomes that I see. I don't have anything particular new. I just think that Barnes, Maddison, Dembele, those are going to be kind of the X factors to see if they can get Vardy freed up for a goal or two. Let's turn our attention to the Liverpool-ManUnited matchup, which I think everyone is very excited to see, unless you're a Chelsea or a Man City fan. Dre, how are you going to unpack this game? What are some key matchups you're going to look for?
I think it's just going to come down to the middle of the field, really. And as well as, I mean, we spoke about Man U's defense. Obviously, Liverpool's front three is phenomenal. It's one of the best in the world. So I think the midfield battle will be important just in terms of who wins that, who dominates possession of the ball. It'll probably end up being Liverpool, I think. Man U will probably play a little bit more on the counter. And I don't know. It's a tough one to call. I would like the game to tie. I would like it to tie, but I think maybe I'll say Liverpool 2-1.
Dre, Harshal?
Yeah, it's obviously going to be a tough one. Liverpool's record at Anfield is spectacular. I think they haven't lost there since 2017, February, if I'm not mistaken. It's about north of 50 games. I don't remember the exact number, but it's north of 50 games since they've lost a league game at Anfield. So, I mean, I would absolutely love it, obviously, if United were the one to break that streak at Anfield. But I will agree with Jay that it will come down to midfield. And I think Thiago will play a huge role. I think he will start. He got 90 minutes under his belt against Southampton. He played 45 minutes in the FA Cup against the Aston Villa Academy, basically. So he has been able to get up to speed, at least in terms of his physical outputs. And Thiago is the kind of guy who can create something out of nothing, and it'll be very difficult to defend against something, against that sort of influence that he can have on games. So let's see how it goes. But I hope for a 2-1 United win, but realistically, I think it might be a draw. It might be a 1-1, or Liverpool could probably win it. But yeah, the heart hopefully hopes for a United win.
I wish I could be original, but I think it's 2-1 Liverpool, or I could even go as far as to say 3-1. So we'll see what happens there. It's going to be. I hope it's not one of those games where both of the teams neutralize themselves. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. So, well, that's where we'll leave the pod for this week. We're sponsored by the Premier League Guide, Moneyball for Football, Opposition Analysis plus Eye Candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Please subscribe to Thinking Fan Football Club on YouTube and your favorite podcast stations. Join us for our next Football Thinking Fans podcast. For now, bella ciao, ciao, ciao.